Hello there, welcome to Brian Lomax Movie Talk and my review for one of my favourite science fiction films, particularly of the last 20 years at any rate. It's Danny Boyle's Sunshine and it is written by Alex Garland, and I've been meaning to get into this film for some time, and with the recent release of Annihilation, which was written and directed by Garland, I thought now was the perfect time to really delve into it. Now just before we do get into it, I just want to mention Cine Sci-Fi, which is a Facebook page I started up recently for science fiction fans. If you like sci-fi movies and really want to talk about them, go over to Facebook, find Cine Sci-Fi, and yeah, join that group and start talking about science fiction movies. It's grown pretty fast, it must be said, a lot faster than I was expecting, a lot faster than I was anticipating. So that's a good thing, obviously. But yeah, we're having some really great discussions on there. Now, I did post on there that I was going to be doing a review of Sunshine. And I asked people to leave their comments. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break this review up into 3 sections. First of all, I'm just going to talk about the film in a general kind of way without any spoilers. Then I'm going to just read out a few messages from what other people thought about the film from the Cine Sci-Fi page. And then after that, I am going to get into spoilers, because there are things about this film, with particular regards to what it means, that I feel like I can't really get into without doing spoilers. So yeah, first up, what are my thoughts on the film? Well, first of all, what is the film about? It's about a crew of 8 men and women who are heading towards the sun, and they have this huge payload. It's a massive bomb the size of Manhattan, and they're going to try and reignite the sun, because this is set distant in the future and the sun is dying. So they need to reignite the sun to stop the Earth from existing in a perpetual winter. So yeah, they're basically trying to save the world. Now, they are the second crew to go. They're on board the Icarus II, and before them, some years before them, I think it was about 6 years before them, 7 years, something like that, the Icarus I, the first Icarus, went and was never heard of again. So, my thoughts on the film. As I've already stated, for me personally, this is one of my favourite science fiction films. Each time I watch it, I get something different out of it. And if you have seen Annihilation and you really like that film for all the reasons I do, which is that it's one of those films where you really have to read into it and everybody gets kind of a different meaning. It is one of those kind of films. Sunshine is one of those kind of films. I personally would rate it higher than Annihilation. I think it's a better film than Annihilation. And that's saying a lot, because I really did like Annihilation. I gave it like a 4.5 out of 5, which should give you some clue as to where I'm going to go with my score on this one. I think that the crew in this are all clearly well defined. They're very rounded characters. They feel like real people with their own personalities, and all bring a different kind of aspect of humanity to proceedings. So you've got Chris Evans' character, who very good, by the way, I must say. Chris Evans in this, if you never really thought of him as much of an actor, he definitely delivers the goods in this film. But his character is all about logic. Everything he does, he's motivated by what is the most logical thing to do, what is the right thing from a logical perspective, you know. And then you've got Rose Byrne, who, again, she's driven by the need to do the right thing, but from a more kind of feeling kind of a place of feeling. You know, she goes with her gut, what she feels is right, that kind of sense of morality. She's kind of led by her personal moral compass. Then you've got Cillian Murphy, who is kind of sandwiched somewhere between the two. And for a lot of the film, we do get the sense that he's the kind of guy who, again, is led with his gut. But then in other places, that logic, that reasoning does come to bear. It does create a few situations in the film where, even from a logical standpoint, when you're just looking at things from purely terms of logic, people have different points of view, and both can be just as well reasoned, just as well argued. Then you've got this character played by Cliff Curtis, Searle, who, yeah, he's an interesting character because he's a psychologist, and he's actually the one on the crew who from a psychological standpoint, does seem to kind of lose it, but maybe not in the way that you might expect. He starts to soak up the sun. They have this lounge, this room where you can go, and it has like a dimmer that kind of dims the rays of the sun so that you can put it to an acceptable level that it doesn't obviously burn you to a crisp. And he's always pushing it, you know, he's always trying to get it to as close as you can possibly get it to opening it up, and he's soaking in those rays. And across the course of the film, you see his skin start to peel. He's obviously been there too long, but he's obsessed with it. It's like he's a genuine sun worshipper. It's like the sun itself becomes like a god. This is a film like Annihilation in which it raises questions about God and humanity. Does God exist? And if so, what does that mean for us? And if he doesn't, again, what does that mean for us? So very similar themes that Alex Garland has dealt with throughout his body of work. The sun, in that sense, becomes this giant metaphor for God. You know, when you think about it, the sun is a giver of life. And if the sun dies, we die. You know, without the sun, there is no life on Earth. This feels like pure science fiction as well. And what I mean by that is it's science fiction in its purest form, in the sense that obviously this would be so far into the future we couldn't comprehend, but a lot of the things in here feel like they've been heavily researched, and you could very easily believe or imagine that we someday would get to this stage. And one of the interesting things about the crew as well is they're primarily made up of East Asians, and you know there's Americans, there's a Brit on there, but they're half of them are like from East Asia. And Danny Boyle's reasoning for that was that if you look at the economy today, the way we're going, the biggest superpowers in the future are most likely going to be China, places like that. And we do get a Japanese captain. He's an interesting character as well. Again, a man of logic, but also very attuned to the feelings of the crew. He's played by an actor called Hiroyuki Sanada, and I've seen him in quite a few films. I really like him as an actor. He always brings a real good presence to the screen. Has an air of nobility about him. He just seems to exude that as a characteristic. If you've ever seen a film called Twilight Samurai, he's the lead role in that, and he's very good, and that's a really good film, so check that out. But yeah, just like I say, everyone in this has been perfectly cast, really well cast. Another couple of members, Michelle Yeoh is in this. She's a scientist, and she's kind of ruled by her science, I guess, her need, her desire to create life. She's in charge of like the botany department, of keeping this green section of the ship going, keeping plant life alive. So she's really driven by that. And then you've got this guy who's second in command, and really his desire is to just get back home. Now this isn't really stated so much in the film. You have to dig a bit deeper into like director's commentary to get that out. But when you look at his performance and you look at the direction he was given by Danny Boyle as a man who really just wants to get back home, that feeds into everything he does brilliantly throughout the film. So yeah, he can be seen probably as the most cowardly of the crew, but at the heart of it, he is just a man who wants to get home. So because all these characters are so brilliantly fleshed out, they all have an arc at some point. They all have a crisis. You feel drawn to each one of these characters at some point because they have something to overcome, which they either do or they don't, whether that is a moral crisis or a physical crisis or an emotional crisis. Another thing that I like about the characters is that despite any faults that any of them might have, none of them becomes a true villain. Cillian Murphy's character kind of becomes our main protagonist in a way, but even he exhibits traits that aren't entirely heroic, you know. And then we have this character played by Chris Evans, who at times can seem like a bit of a hard ass, can seem like a bit of a douche. But actually, when you look at things from his perspective, when he's weighing up the fate of all humanity compared to one or a few people, you kind of have to get on his side, again, from a logical standpoint. So that idea, those ideologies, conflicting ideologies at times of logic and reason versus emotion and feeling, yeah, they're played with very nicely throughout the film. It's brilliant writing from Garland, which I've kind of come to expect now. But this for me was the film that kind of put him on the map. You know, he'd done work with Danny Boyle previously, but this one, yeah, definitely put him on the map. And with the likes of Ex Machina and even his script for Dread, he's one of my favourite writers now. There is a beautiful score by John Murphy, and the music in this film plays really well into the characters and the situations that are going on. There's a moment towards the end of the film when Cillian Murphy's character is desperately trying to do something, trying to achieve something, and he's essentially just moving along quite slowly in a spacesuit. But because of the music that is behind it, and obviously through Cillian Murphy's performance, you feel that tension, you feel that kind of rising sense of, I really want him to do it, I really want him to get there. It's brilliant across the board, from directing, performance and music. This wasn't a film with a particularly high budget either, and with that in mind, considering that, they pull off some really impressive work from a special effects standpoint and a production design standpoint. Really good. It's up there for me with the likes of some of the best science fiction movies. It doesn't quite have the same visual aesthetic as something like Alien or 2001, but it is as equally impressive. And this film also does, I think, for a lot of people, crib from those other more famous films. It feels quite familiar in many ways. It's a setup and a scenario that kind of feels like we may have seen before. But I think because of the way it's handled from all fronts, it feels fresh. And I think it's hard to do that. You know, it's hard to take certain tropes that are familiar and make them feel fresh. And if you can do that, then that's when you put yourself up there with the likes of the classics, the ones that set that bar. A lot of people do have a problem with the third act in this film. A lot of people feel like it changes direction really sharply and becomes something different. I personally don't, and we'll get into that when I get into the spoilers, but I think it's perfect. It's perfectly in keeping with the themes and the issues that are raised within the first two acts of the film. I think it's quite a natural and a logical way to go. I think this film is an incredible piece of work, and like I say, I've said already many times throughout this, it is one of my favourite science fiction films. I have no choice but to give it a 5 out of 5. When I first saw this, I think I gave it like a 4 out of 5, and then I saw it a couple more times and that went up to like a 4.5. And now, seeing it for this review, sitting down, getting really critically minded about it, looking at every aspect of it, I have no choice. This to me is what science fiction is all about. Now, like I mentioned, I did put out on the Cine Sci-Fi Facebook group that I would be watching this film. I wanted to get some of the group's thoughts. We have a few comments just to go through, so I will go through them. Troy Lee says, I have never seen this and I'm looking forward to your review even more now. There's quite a few people who've never seen this, and it's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up, like I say, especially in regards to the fact that Annihilation has just come out. If a lot of people are talking that film up, and I do think a lot of them haven't seen this film and they definitely need to come and check it out. Sean Blackmore says, I love Sunshine, Cillian is great in it, it gets trippy as hell in the third act though. Now I'm in the mood for a rewatch. Absolutely, yeah, I can agree with that. I think the third act definitely gets trippy. Whether or not it trips the film up is a different matter. Personally, I don't think it does, but I can agree it is pretty trippy. Sean Aspinall says, absolutely lovely bit of sci-fi with a career best from Chris Evans. Don't buy into the third act hate either. Yep, definitely with you there, Sean, as I've already stated. This is what I'm saying. This could be quite a divisive film. I think it is quite a divisive film for a lot of people. mostly because of that third act. If you can get on board that third act, then I think you may share my perspective of just how good this film is. Michael Marshall says, this is one of those movies that I thought was just stellar, pun intended, right up until the thing happens, and then I had to force myself to finish it. Again, yeah, he's going for that third act thing. It does switch a lot of people off. I don't understand it myself, but that seems to be the big issue with this film. John Harkin says, great film, stellar cast, good story, great effects. Seen this a few times now, and every time it never fails to entertain. Would recommend this to anyone. Top quality film. John Stephen Walsh says, love it, but don't care for the third act. The problem is that the first and second acts build towards something higher than just a sci-fi actioner. This could have been on the level of 2001 and the original Solaris. But the third act turns it into a stalker film, set on a space station a la Jason X, done with more talent. It does so much right until then. For example, the death of a character caught outside, and especially the idea that everyone knows this is a one-way trip. And when injured and dying, they try to accomplish it for something higher than themselves. I won't continue reading just the rest of what he put there, just because he does get into a bit of spoiler territory, and I want to just save that till after these comments. But yeah, clearly, again, someone else who's upset by the third act. I disagree. I do think there is a shift in tone, and that's kind of a trippy aspect. But it all comes down to whether or not you can buy the reasoning for that change, and I do, and we'll get into it in just a moment. Keith Batchelor says this movie was great, didn't get enough publicity. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, like, I don't really remember much about the publicity for this, so I guess that would be a correct assumption. I know that I got an interest in the film after seeing the trailer. I saw the trailer, and that's probably about as much as they put out there. So yeah, I think they could have done more to sell this. And I think science fiction, particularly intelligent science fiction, does tend to be something that studios fear. You know, you look at Annihilation, the studio that originally came, was backing that, dropped it because they feared it was too intellectual. So yeah, I think they do fear putting too much money behind the marketing of films like this. Finally, Johnny Styles says, haven't heard of it, but interested now. Yeah, you definitely should be, like I say. And if my review so far hasn't made you interested, then I don't know what will. Now, as I said, I did want to get into spoilers, and that's mainly because I want to get into what I feel this film is all about. Some of what I say here is things that I've heard from Danny Boyle. But as he didn't write the film, I always think that, when you have a writer of a film, they have a particular thing they're trying to say. And if another director comes on, they may not necessarily agree with what the writer is trying to say, and they come at it from a different angle, and they have their own thing to say. And then we, as the audience, also bring our own kind of reasoning to bear on it, and it means something to us that might not be the same thing that it did to both the writer and director. And I think it's just worth pointing that out before I get into this. So what I think this film means, where I think it goes and leads to, isn't necessarily the definitive meaning. You derive your own meaning from it. This is just what it means for me. So overall, with this film, I think that the sun is essentially a metaphor for God. It is a giver of life. The sun is dying at the moment in this film, and they're going to reignite it. And because it's dying, the earth is dying. Now you can read that as a metaphor for the world's faith. If you think that faith is dying out in society, that in turn is causing the world in some way to die. Now we have these two crews who go towards the sun to reignite it, and on both crews we get particularly one man, if not all of the first crew, but particularly one on both, who starts to look at the sun almost as if it were God. So we get Searle on the Icarus II, and on the first crew we got Mark Strong's character, who was the captain of that crew, who went apparently insane along with the rest of his crew, And whether he killed his crew or not, or whether they willingly died just looking into the sun, we don't know. But one thing is for sure, the captain believes, or has come to believe, that Earth's time is up, that the sun is God, and God decides when we die. And who are we to argue with that? That's something that he says at one point during the film, you know, that this end that seems to be coming on Earth because of the cold, it's God's choice, it's not ours. We are going in these two spaceships and we're using science to try and reignite the sun. And then we have this character on the second ship, on Icarus 2, Searle, who starts to exhibit behaviour that could very well end up with him becoming like that Mark Strong character. You know, he's looking at the sun. There's one point when his own captain is about to die. He's about to be faced with the sun in all its glory. And rather than showing concern for his captain, he's just asking him, what do you see? What do you see? He's that eager to know what it's like to come face to face with the sun. And he's more concerned with that than he is for the life of his captain. That's how obsessed he's starting to become with this notion of the sun being this something of a glorious presence, you know. And if you look at it from a biblical standpoint, when people have looked into the face of God during the Bible, they've become blind. Some have even died, you know. So, you know, you think about Paul on the road to Damascus, comes face to face with God, and he goes blind. And these characters as well, they can't stand being within the presence, the full presence of the sun. That, you know, this thing they have come to believe is God. So you've got characters like Chris Evans' character who are purely logic-driven, fact-based, science-based, and Michelle Yeoh's character to that extent. I mean, when her world is kind of torn apart, she suddenly becomes a different person. She starts talking about killing off other crew members. That's because her world is purely driven by science. And then you get characters like Mark Strong's character, who becomes a religious fanatic to the point where he kills his crew, possibly, or he's certainly trying to kill this crew, just so that they can't achieve their goal. So there's that, you know, it does show you the religious fundamentalism and the scientific fundamentalism. So again, like I said, we've got this thing that is a popular notion throughout science fiction films, something that is explored quite regularly, this faith versus science. Cillian Murphy's character is face to face with the raw power of both the sun and the science that they've created. This bomb, which has literally just exploded, and we get this brief moment where it's kind of a surreal moment where he reaches out and he touches the power of the sun, essentially. And in front of him, he's got the sun. Behind him, he's got this bomb, this man-made scientific creation. I think that in this final scene with Cillian Murphy, you have to ask yourself, does he touch the face of God, metaphorically speaking? And if so, does that mean that science will ultimately bring us closer to God? Because in that final moment, faith and science shake hands. And I think that is ultimately what the film is about. So there you go. That is my take on Sunshine and my review. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of that. And I hope you will go to Sunshine with a greater appreciation of what is going on, and particularly with that third act, because for me personally, without that Mark Strong character coming up, without that religious fundamentalist kind of attitude he brings into the situation, and everything that we've seen before leading up to that, we don't get those themes. That doesn't come out. We don't get that kind of science versus nature, the faith aspect, you know. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Please do leave your comments down below with regards to the film overall and what you think about it. And don't forget to check out the Cine Sci-Fi Facebook group. We have a really good time there and we talk a lot of science fiction. Until next time, cracking.